The crown of the Black Wolf. Aurelia Vale had once yearned for a proud death upon the battlefield, where blood dyed the white snow crimson and the call of war horns thundered beneath rows of silver wolf banners flying in arrogant splendor. Yet fate smiled upon her with cruelty. The boundary between life and death was decided not on the field of glory, but in a dark oak forest, so silent it sent chills down the spine. She did not fall beneath the swords and spears of her enemies, but bled beneath a sacrificial formation cast by the very man who had once fought at her side. Betrayed by trust itself, and by the false affection woven from honeyed lies, the renowned female general of Eldermark drew her final breath in absolute fury, carrying with her a vow of vengeance carved deep into the very core of her soul. But death was not the end. It was the beginning of an imprisonment more terrifying than any dungeon. When Aurelia opened her eyes again, she was horrified to discover that her blazing soul had been locked inside an entirely unfamiliar body. Gone were the strong, hardened muscles tempered through years of battle. Gone was the strength to swing a great sword and sweep enemy soldiers from her path. Now, she was Lady Lenora Ashbourne, an ailing, pallid Omega lady, despised by her own family and regarded as nothing more than a precious vessel awaiting the day she would be offered up as tribute. From a free wolf roaming the open plains, she had been thrown into the suffocating gilded cage of the aristocracy, reduced to a fragile pawn in a political game stained with darkness. The height of tragedy descended when that frail body was forced into the Black Moon betrothal, becoming the bride of the greatest enemy of her life, Alpha King Hadrian Blackthorn. The young king bore the savage curse of the Black Wolf, ruling the throne with a suffocating dominance and a silent darkness. As Aurelia stepped into the towering, solemn grandeur of Blackthorn Palace, she carried with her the heightened vigilance of a prisoner cast straight into the lair of a beast. She had no weapon, no loyal army, only a razor-sharp mind and a will to survive that could not be extinguished. Amid cold stone walls and lavish banquets concealing countless invisible blades, a merciless confrontation quietly unfolded. Hadrian had always despised this heavily arranged marriage, yet whenever the dark, bottomless eyes of the tyrant king met the proud gaze of his small bride, one that absolutely refused to bow, the beastly instinct in his veins roared with the frantic rhythm of a sacred, fated bond. Through the guise of a weak young lady, he vaguely recognized a brilliant ghost from the past, an unyielding flame he had always respected but had never dared reach out to touch. Surrounded by the venomous schemes of the Elder Council, the watchful eyes of traitors, and the destructive power of a curse waiting to devour the throne on blood moon nights, Aurelia had to learn to fight on an entirely new battlefield. Here, there was no ear-splitting clash of blades, only poisonous vows, venom-laced smiles, and a burning desire to reclaim the right to decide her own fate. Could a warrior's soul break the chains of destiny while imprisoned in a fragile body? And amid layers of lies and deep-seated hatred, could a love born from darkness possess enough strength to cleanse the curse that had haunted the kingdom for centuries? Chapter 1. The General Who Died by an Oath. Aurelia Vale had always envisioned her death on the battlefield, amidst the wail of war horns echoing through the mountain passes, upon a bed of crimson snow, with the silver wolf banner flying proudly behind her. She had never imagined such a silent, wretched end, falling into the very arms of the man who had once kissed her forehead and called her his future. The black oak forest was shrouded in the ghostly light of a crescent moon, its gnarled branches weaving together like skeletal fingers trying to conceal a monstrous crime. Dorian Marwick knelt before her, his hands still gripping her shoulders with a familiarity that now felt agonizingly cruel. Beneath them, the sacrificial circle began to ignite with blood and the twisted runes of an ancient rite. He had once told her this was a rite of protection, an age-old spell to shield the frontier army from the prying gaze of the Blackthorn curse. She had trusted him, just as she had always trusted every decision made by the Lord in the deep indigo cloak. When Dorian handed her the silver chalice filled with smooth, viscous liquid, he had smiled and promised it was a tonic to stabilize her spirit after long, arduous campaigns. She had drained it without a moment's hesitation. The cloying sweetness of berries was instantly replaced by the metallic tang of blood. It was no protective elixir, it was moonbane, a forbidden poison crafted to strip a werewolf of their power. Aurelia tried to recoil, her hand instinctively dropping to her hip to draw her blade. But her body no longer belonged to her. Her joints felt numb, and the muscles honed through hundreds of battles now felt as heavy as lead. She collapsed onto the damp earth, her ash-colored eyes widening as she watched the ritual circle draw the very essence of her life force. Simultaneously, a sharp, searing pain tore through her temples. It was a sensation she knew all too well, a phantom ache that always manifested whenever she dared to question his orders, or whenever she felt a decision of his was amiss. In that thin sliver between life and death, everything became terrifyingly clear. The violet stone ring on Dorian's finger pulsed in rhythm with the blood-written sigils. The vow-bind curse. She recognized the forbidden magic that had imprisoned her for so many years, a wretched spell capable of warping one's free will, turning every doubt into self-loathing, and molding blind loyalty into a facade of love. The way her heart raced for him, the compulsion to throw her life away to protect him, it had all been a hallucination crafted by magical manipulation. Why? Aurelia's throat bled as she spoke, her voice raspy and broken, shattering the solemn silence of the deep forest. Dorian looked down at her, his expression a mixture of feigned sorrow and burning ambition. He reached out to caress her fading, cold cheek. I needed the soul of a warrior who had sworn absolute loyalty to break this ancient seal. Only the blood and spirit of a silver she-wolf are potent enough to awaken the dormant magic that will finally allow me to topple the Blackthorn throne. His words pierced through Aurelia, colder and sharper than any blade she had ever endured. She tried to draw a breath of the frigid night air, feeling every fragment of her soul being torn from her body by the cruel ritual. At that very moment, memories she thought long buried came rushing back, unbidden. She remembered a day of blinding snow at the ruined Cathedral of St. Orwin. She remembered the silhouette of a man with raven-black hair, wrapped in a cloak the color of the deep night, standing motionless amidst the gale. The gaze of Alpha King Hadrian Blackthorn had touched her then, not with the predatory bloodlust of a tyrant, as the rumors claimed, but with something profound and quiet that she had been unable to comprehend at the time. Why did the image of her enemy appear so vividly in her final moments? "Did you ever love me?" she asked, not out of any desperate hope, but to confirm the full extent of this humiliation. Dorian lowered his eyes, avoiding her piercing, flame-bright gaze. He was silent for a heartbeat before answering in a hollow, lifeless tone. "I needed you." The shell of the vowbind shattered. The manipulative magic no longer had the strength to cling to a dying vessel. The invisible tether that had once tightened around Aurelia's heart snapped. She felt the raw, brutal truth. The love she had once cherished was nothing more than a noose soaked in honey. Her heart did not ache for the loss of her lover. It burned with indignation that she had been robbed of the right to own her own soul. Aurelia lifted her head, using the last of her strength to face her betrayer. Her ash-colored eyes were perfectly clear, as cold as winter frost. She spoke, each word precise and unwavering. "If my love for you is real, why do I feel, at this very hour, that I have finally been set free?" Dorian's face flickered with a sudden agitation. The ritual flared with a brilliant crimson light, consuming the form of the frontier general. Every sound in the black oak forest vanished. Aurelia's consciousness plunged into a bottomless abyss, dragging with it a rage that had not yet had the chance to erupt and a vow of vengeance carved into the very depths of her soul. And then, she opened her eyes. What greeted her was not the eternal night of the afterlife, but a room overflowing with white silk and the pungent, cloying scent of herbal medicine. She scanned her surroundings, her gaze locking onto a large brass mirror in the corner. The reflection looking back was not the proud silver she-wolf with the scars of glory, but the fragile, pallid face of a complete stranger, Lady Lenora Ashbourne. Chapter 2. The Fragile Bride of Blackthorn. A werewolf's sense of smell is an instinct that cannot be deceived, yet the suffocating, cloying scent of herbs currently assaulting Aurelia's senses made her feel physically ill. She drew a ragged breath, summoning every ounce of strength into her arms to push herself off the feather mattress. However, the slightest movement sent a sharp, agonizing pain through her chest, as if thousands of needles were piercing her flesh. Her arms were dangerously thin, her skin porcelain pale and devoid of the calluses earned from gripping a sword. She tried to step out of bed with the ingrained reflex of a soldier, but her frail legs immediately betrayed her. Her knees slammed against the polished oak floor, and a wave of vertigo washed over her, causing the room to tilt violently. Helplessness and humiliation welled up in the throat of the fallen general. She, who once swung a great sword to sever the banners of the royal army with a single strike, could now barely support her own body. Trapped in the fragile shell of an omega, destitute of strength, bereft of claws, her existence was now no different from that of prey waiting for a hunter's blade. The bedroom door swung open, shattering Aurelia's chaotic thoughts. A middle-aged woman with platinum hair swept into an elaborate updo entered, draped in a deep blue silk gown embroidered with intricate crests. It was Duchess Eldermark Ashbourne, a woman with eyes as cold as a frozen lake. Following her was Vivian, whose smug smile matched the vibrant, blood-red dress that seemed to consume everything in the room. "So, Lady Lenora has finally decided to grace us with her wakefulness?" Melis's voice was monotone, devoid of even a sliver of maternal warmth. She stepped closer, gazing down at the kneeling Aurelia with an expressionless mask. "You are not permitted to die before the Black Moon Covenant is fulfilled. Do not forget, your life exists solely to serve the glory of this house." Vivian stepped forward, her gaze scanning the pathetic form of her stepsister as she curled her lip. "Mother, don't be so harsh. After all, this precious vessel of the Ashbournes must be kept in pristine condition before it is offered up. The Blackthorn royal family wouldn't be pleased to receive a cracked repository." Their venomous words were like jagged pieces of glass settling into Aurelia's sharpening mind. She focused on regulating her breathing, refusing to betray a hint of panic. Drawing upon her battlefield expertise, she began to synthesize the information. Black Moon Covenant. Offering. Vessel. She was trapped in the body of Lenora Ashbourne, a political bride to be forced into the arms of Alpha King Hadrian Blackthorn, the very nemesis she had once sworn to destroy. Aurelia braced herself against the edge of the bed and slowly pulled herself upright. Her gaze swept to the brass mirror opposite, catching the sight of her collarbone exposed by the slipping silk of her gown. There, a crimson, crescent moon birthmark stood stark against her pallid skin. Memories of the black oak forest flashed through her mind. This symbol was identical to the ancient script that had flared to life during Dorian's sacrificial ritual. This could not be a coincidence. It was a sign of a dark conspiracy that had taken root long before her demise. Melis signaled to a maid, who brought forward a silver tray holding a porcelain cup filled with a bubbling, dark purple liquid. The pungent, earthy scent immediately triggered a heightened state of alertness in Aurelia's mind. "Drink," Melis commanded, her tone brooking no defiance. "Your heat suppressant. You cannot enter Blackthorn reeking of such weak, chaotic pheromones. They would tear you to pieces before you even reach the throne." Aurelia knew that if she resisted, she would be pinned down, and the noxious liquid would be forced down her throat. She bowed her head, feigning submission as she took the porcelain cup. Using a sleight-of-hand maneuver perfected during her years of survival on the border, she brought the cup to her lips as if drinking, yet skillfully poured half the contents into her wide, silken sleeve, leaving only a bitter aftertaste on her tongue. She needed a sample to analyze whether this tonic was a medicine or a slow-acting poison. Seeing her compliance, Vivian smirked. She strolled to a small table in the corner and idly picked up an ornate silver butter knife. "I hear the Alpha King wants nothing to do with this marriage. He loathes our family. How do you think he'll react when he discovers his bride is nothing more than a useless creature, gasping for air in the shadows?" Fury surged through her veins. Instinctively reaching to defend her honor, Aurelia lunged for the silver knife in Vivian's hand to assert her dominance. But the moment her fingers touched the cold metal, Lenora's frail body betrayed her once more. Her hand trembled violently, unable to maintain its grip. The knife slipped from her fingers, clattering against the marble floor with a sharp, chilling sound before she could even brandish it, an utter humiliation. The room erupted in mocking laughter. Melis shook her head in disdain, while Vivian's eyes glowed with triumphant glee. If this had been the old Lenora, she would have collapsed and wept in shame. But the soul inhabiting this body was Aurelia Vale. She did not cry, nor did she tremble a second longer. She calmly knelt on the cold floor and slowly retrieved the silver knife. Her eyes scanned every face in the room, recording every trace of arrogance and every cruel sneer. She would reclaim everything, not with the blades of the battlefield, but by weaponizing the very rot of the royal customs that had shackled this poor girl. "Prepare my cloak," Aurelia said, her tone so steady and ice-cold that Vivian's laughter died in her throat. "I have no desire to keep the king waiting." Outside the stained-glass window, the rhythmic thud of hooves against the courtyard cobbles rang out, marking the hour of destiny. The royal carriage, emblazoned with the Black Wolf crest within a laurel wreath, had pulled up to the main gate of the Ashbourne estate. A tall, imposing figure descended from the majestic vehicle, radiating an alpha aura so potent that the very air seemed to solidify. Alpha King Hadrian Blackthorn had arrived, the tyrant cursed by the Black Wolf, her sworn enemy, and now, the groom that fate had so cruelly chosen for her. The cage door had swung open, but Aurelia knew better. She was merely stepping from one prison into a far more treacherous battlefield. Chapter 3: Contract Under the Black Crown. The carriage bearing the royal crest rumbled slowly through the massive iron gates, carrying Aurelia deep into the heart of Eldermark. The Blackthorn fortress loomed amidst the thick, swirling mists of the northern mountains, its jagged spires piercing the gray sky like blood-soaked spears rising from the earth. In stark contrast to the stifling, vapid vanity of the Ashbourne estate, this place exuded a primal, cold, and ruthless authority, much like its master. The crunch of wooden wheels against cobblestone finally ceased before the grand staircase. The carriage door was swung open by a detachment of guards clad in full black plate armor. From the highest step, Alpha King Hadrian Blackthorn stood watching, his gaze deeper and colder than eternal glaciers. He wore dark, impeccably tailored attire, a wolf fur-trimmed cloak cascading over his broad shoulders. He wore no glittering crown, yet his very presence was an absolute power in itself, weighing heavily upon the breath of everyone nearby. Aurelia stepped down, struggling to keep Lenora's frail legs from trembling or buckling under the raw, oppressive aura radiating from the young king. There had been a time when she stood on the opposing front lines, staring at him across a sea of blood and corpses. She had deemed him a heartless tyrant. But now, trapped within the weak shell of a political pawn, she realized his eyes did not hold savage fury, but a piercing, high-alert vigilance and a loneliness buried unimaginably deep. The council chamber was a vast, semicircular hall where flickering candles cast elongated shadows against a soaring vaulted ceiling carved with packs of wild wolves. The elders, nobles, and clerics had gathered in full force, their scrutinizing, scornful, and calculating gazes converged upon the new bride. At the center of the black marble table lay the scroll of the Black Moon Covenant, waiting for the signature that would seal the fate of two souls forced into union. An elderly cleric with a flowing beard intoned the harsh terms of the treaty. It mandated that for the next 30 days, the bride was to remain exclusively by the Alpha King's side and was forbidden from leaving the Blackthorn grounds. More crucially, she held no right to refuse any mate bond inspection rituals and was required to use every means necessary to suit the king's instincts whenever the moon shifted phases. Aurelia approached the stone table, her eyes skimming the flowing ancient script on the parchment. Though she wore the visage of a fragile Omega who had never stepped beyond her boudoir, her way of reading the scroll was far from that of a debutante reviewing a marriage contract. Her gaze was razor-sharp, hyper-focused, her long fingers tracing the edges of the paper with purpose, like a general scrutinizing a battle map to find an enemy's weakness. Seated on the throne at the dais, Hadrian narrowed his eyes. He missed nothing. The girl before him bore no resemblance to the fearful, submissive creature rumored to be the Ashbourne daughter. Suddenly, Aurelia's finger halted at the seventh clause. She knit her delicate brows together and looked straight at the expectant council. "I demand an amendment to this clause," her voice rang out, clear and commanding, shattering the solemn atmosphere of the hall. The word submission appears 3 times, implying that the bride must blindly obey every command to soothe the king's wolf. This is not a marriage. It is enslavement. Replace submission with alliance. The council erupted in immediate indignation. Murmurs quickly escalated into sharp, heated protests. A count slammed his hand against the table, pointing an accusatory finger at her. "Insolent girl! Does one of the rotting Ashbourne line dare demand parity with the throne? You were brought here as an offering, not to negotiate." Yet, Aurelia did not flinch. She stood tall, not retreating a single step. That very calm defiance triggered a violent reaction within Hadrian. Her scent, a peculiar blend of cold cedar and wild mountain daisies, suddenly hit him like a physical blow. His inner wolf, a primal instinct that hungered for slaughter and ruin, suddenly let out a ferocious roar, not of rage, but of desire.
"Mate."
The roar echoing within Hadrian's mind left him reeling. He gritted his teeth, veins bulging on the back of his hands as they gripped the armrests of his throne. It is an illusion, he told himself. Aurelia Vale is dead. She fell by the traitor Dorian's hand, and her body is naught but ash. The girl before me is merely a tool of Duchess Melis, a bitter mirage fate has conjured to mock my black wolf curse. To extinguish the instincts clawing at his insides, Hadrian descended from the throne. He intentionally unleashed his alpha aura, sending a suffocating, leaden wave of pressure straight toward Aurelia. He wanted to see how long this little bride could maintain her arrogance. Under such crushing force, ordinary men in the council were forced to bow their heads, gasping for air. Lenora's body immediately reacted with agonizing intensity, her joints cracked, her knees threatening to buckle and shatter against the cold stone floor. A sense of suffocation swelled in her chest, forcing her blood to rush backward toward her heart. But the soul inhabiting that frame was a warrior who had never known how to kneel to an enemy. Aurelia bit her lower lip until it bled, using her remaining strength to lock her knees. She held her head high, letting cold sweat bead on her brow as she stared directly into Hadrian's abyss-black eyes. There was no pleading, no fear. Only an iron will set aflame. Not far off, the personal guard, Sir Rowan, frowned slightly. He had seen this look, this stubborn defensive stance, somewhere before, on a battlefield drowning in corpses and white snow. Enough! The oldest count struck a staff against the floor, cutting through the silent confrontation between king and bride. "Lady Ashbourne, if you do not agree to the terms, then prove your sincerity with an act.
Kneel.
Kneel before the Alpha King to confirm your submission to this crown, and we shall consider overlooking your previous insolence." Every gaze in the chamber fell upon the slender silhouette standing in the center. The tension was palpable, tight as a drawn bowstring, every breath seemingly suspended. Hadrian stood less than 3 paces away, the darkness of his cloak nearly swallowing her small frame. He wanted her to kneel, to prove she was just a fragile thing easily broken, so he could definitively discard the maddening turmoil in his heart. Yet, Aurelia slowly wiped the smudge of blood from the corner of her lips. Her eyes reflected the flickering candlelight, bright and proud. She looked straight at Hadrian, her voice not loud, but striking every word deep into the minds of those present. "A marriage contract requires a vow, not a knee." As those words fell, Hadrian's pupils constricted violently. His heart skipped a beat, as if an invisible hand had just brutally crushed his chest. He felt as though he had been hurled back into the past, to that day of raging snow at the ruined St. Orwin Cathedral. Back then, a general in blood-stained armor, holding a broken greatsword to protect the refugees, had leveled her blade at him and uttered a similar sentiment in that same indomitable tone.
Why?
Why would the fragile lady of the Ashbourne house speak the words of a dead soul? Why, in a single moment, did the image of the only woman I ever secretly loved superimpose itself entirely over this small body? A silence descended upon the hall, so heavy that one could hear the wax dripping onto the bronze candelabra. Not allowing the council a moment to voice further criticism, Hadrian turned abruptly. His dark wool cloak caught the air like a cold gale. "The meeting is adjourned," he commanded coldly, his voice raspy with suppressed tension, and he strode out of the hall without looking back, leaving the council in stunned silence and Aurelia with a confused frown. She stood there, thinking the king's disdain for the Ashbourne family had simply exhausted his patience. She was completely unaware of the tempest tearing through the man's inner world. That night, mist from the northern mountains descended, cloaking Blackthorn Castle in a lonely sorrow. Hadrian did not return to the royal bedchamber, nor did he go to the North Tower to prepare for the upcoming new moon. He sequestered himself in a narrow memorial chamber deep in the subterranean vaults, where the only light came from a single torch embedded in the mossy stone. Before him, carefully placed on a pedestal of jet-black velvet, lay a great sword snapped in two and a gray cloak stained with the hues of dried blood. The relics of Aurelia Vale, the silver she-wolf of the frontier. Hadrian stood motionless for a long time, his tall, broad-backed silhouette swallowed by the shadows of the cold stone walls. He reached out with scarred fingers to touch the cold steel of the broken blade, feeling the dull ache gnawing at his heart. His sense of smell still lingered on the scent of cedar and mountain daisies, and his ears still echoed with the proud words spoken in the hall. The tyrant's lips trembled, whispering a question of sheer anguish into the silent dark. "Why do I see her in your eyes?" Chapter 4. The Masked Masquerade. The Blackthorn Ballroom was breathtakingly opulent tonight, yet it felt as stifling as a gilded dungeon. Thousands of candles nestled in massive crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant golden glow, reflecting off the polished marble floors. Nobles, council elders, high clerics, and envoys from every territory were draped in the most exorbitant silks and brocades. They circulated through the banquet hall with smiles measured to the millimeter, lifting crystal goblets brimming with dark red wine. This debut of the royal bride was, in truth, a battlefield without blades, where wolves in human skin utilized honeyed praise to probe for each other's weaknesses. Aurelia sat motionless on a chair carved with laurel branches, set one step lower than the Alpha King's throne. She wore a snow-white silk gown edged in silver thread, her hair swept into an updo that showcased her delicate, swan-like neck. To the eyes of those casting scrutinizing glances her way, Lady Lenora Ashbourne was merely a fragile offering, a pale, harmless political pawn. She received their gazes with cool composure, her long fingers lightly stroking the rim of her wine glass. Her body still throbbed with the lingering aftermath of the suppressant forced upon her by Melis, but her mind remained razor-sharp and acutely alert. From across the hall, Vivian Ashbourne wove through the crowd, approaching her. She wore a dress of vibrant red that seemed to scorch every gaze, her smile blossoming with hidden intent. "My dearest sister," Vivian chirped, her voice loud enough to command the attention of the nobles nearby. "On such a magnificent evening, your grand debut before the entire court, surely you wouldn't deny us the privilege of witnessing the royal dance? I hear the Moon Crescent Waltz is a necessity for every queen to master to lead the festivities." Whispers rippled through the room. The Moon Crescent Waltz was an incredibly complex dance, demanding fluidity, rhythm, and a flawless memory for steps. Everyone in the nobility knew that Lady Lenora had been sequestered in her chambers since childhood due to her frail constitution. She had never been granted the opportunity to learn such extravagant etiquette. Vivian's proposal was not an honor. It was a trap set in broad daylight to humiliate the king's bride before the entire kingdom. Aurelia looked up at her stepsister's triumphant grin. She knew that if she refused, the label of useless cripple, of the Ashbourne house would be forever branded upon her, and her authority at Blackthorn would be strangled in the cradle. She slowly set her glass down, offered a faint, pale smile, and stood up. If that is the wish of all present, I have no reason to decline. The musicians on the high dais caught the steward's nod and struck the opening notes. The melody of the strings was undulating, rhythmic, yet urgent. Aurelia stepped into the center of the vacant dance floor. She had absolutely no knowledge of how the moon crescent waltz should look, but the body of a general who had survived hundreds of battles immediately instinctively sought a mode of survival. If dancing was the control of space, then it was no different from a tactical battle. As the music swelled, Aurelia began to move. She did not glide softly like the high-born ladies. Instead, the heels of her shoes struck the stone in rhythms that were decisive and precise to the millimeter. Rather than spinning with ostentatious flair, she executed tactical backward steps, gentle yet enticing, much like how a general pulls back troops to stretch the enemy's formation. Then, she turned, a swift, sharp pivot to cover every blind spot behind her, before coming to a firm halt right in the center of the floor. Her movements were perfectly moderated to match the strength of Lenora's frame, yet the aura she radiated was so overbearing and proud that one could not look away. The noble crowd gradually fell silent. They did not notice the absence of standard steps. Instead, they were enthralled by a strange, commanding aura. Several elders began to whisper, claiming this was an ancient variation of the royal dance, a dance of solemnity and dominance that only the purest bloodlines could comprehend. Their initial scorn was slowly replaced by astonishment and guarded reverence. But one person in the hall understood the origin of those steps all too well. From atop the towering throne, Hadrian gripped the armrests until the thin gold plating seemed ready to crack. His gaze was anchored to the small figure shifting across the ballroom. His heart hammered, sending heavy echoes through his chest. He did not see a dance. He saw a blizzard. He saw St. Orwin Cathedral wreathed in flames. He saw a general in blood-stained armor, using those very tactical retreats and pivots to shield a crowd of innocent refugees from the Reaper's blade. It was Aurelia Vale. The way she maintained distance, the way she shifted her center of gravity to be ready for a counterattack, it was all fighting instinct etched into the marrow of the silver she-wolf. The wolf within Hadrian clawed violently, a surge of desire and agony rising to his throat. He wanted to leap down, to grab her shoulders and roar her name. But cruel logic reminded him that the body glowing before him was Lady Lenora Ashbourne. If he acknowledged her as Aurelia, the council would immediately burn her alive for the crime of a foreign soul usurping a noble body. Just as the music ended and Aurelia stood poised in the center, the grand doors of the hall swung open. A guard struck his spear against the marble floor and announced in a booming voice, "Lord Dorian Marwick, envoy of the southern frontier, arrives to offer his congratulations to the Alpha King and the future Queen." The air in the ballroom seemed to freeze. Aurelia froze, the blood in her veins turning to ice. She turned her head toward the doors. The traitor stood there, draped in a velvet cloak trimmed with gold thread, the familiar, gentle, and conciliatory smile always playing on his lips. Dorian walked slowly through the crowd, heading straight toward the center of the dance floor. His gaze swept over the throne but immediately locked onto the girl in the white silk gown. He approached her, bowed with aristocratic elegance, and reached out to take her cold hand. The moment his lips brushed her knuckles, a piercing, stabbing pain tore through Aurelia's temples, exactly like that night in the Black Oak Forest. But this time, as the echoes of the vow-bind dissipated with death, what remained was not confusion or fanatical love, but a surge of disgust so visceral she had to clench her teeth to keep from yanking her hand away. Dorian looked up at her. His deep eyes contained a madness born of stubbornness. He leaned in close, his breath brushing her ear, and whispered a name in a volume audible only to the two of them. Aurelia. She stood motionless, her heart beating with a cold, rational rhythm. He knew she had survived and had borrowed Lenora's body. From above, Hadrian observed every move. The keen senses of an Alpha King immediately detected the anomaly. The air did not just carry expensive perfume, it carried the faint, earthy, metallic stench of a forbidden poison. Moonbane. It radiated from the robes of Dorian Marwick. Simultaneously, Hadrian's eyes caught a subtle nod, an exchange of dark intent between Duchess Malice at the edge of the hall and the newly arrived envoy, a detail that did not escape Vivian's sharp gaze either. A hidden fury erupted. The black wolf within Hadrian growled, demanding to be let out. The presence of an old enemy, the scent of poison, the filthy touch of Dorian upon the girl who carried Aurelia's image. Everything was the final drop pushing the young king to his breaking point. He knew if he sat there for one more second, he would leap down and break the envoy's neck with his own hands, exposing his fatal vulnerability regarding this forced bride. Without a word, Hadrian suddenly stood up. His black cloak flared in a sharp arc. He strode down the steps, brushing past Dorian and Aurelia with a terrifying aura that lowered the ambient temperature to freezing, then exited the hall with long, decisive strides. The king's abrupt departure left a bewildered silence in the ballroom. Aurelia watched his back vanish behind the heavy doors, a hollow, bitter feeling rising in her chest. She mistook his coldness and sudden exit for the utter disdain he held for her, a bride who brought nothing but trouble. She had no idea he was fleeing from his own desperate, feral instinct to protect her. Dorian released her hand, offered a cryptic smile, and melted into the whispering crowd of nobles. As he walked away, Aurelia felt a slight weight in her palm. A small piece of parchment had been slipped into her hand without her noticing. She carefully stepped into the shadows behind a large pillar and unfolded the paper. In the dim candlelight, the neat but chillingly threatening script emerged. Tonight, the West Bell Tower. If you do not come to meet me, I will tell the entire council that the king's bride is an interloping soul. Chapter 5. New Moon Night in the North Tower. The new moon descended upon Eldermark like a gargantuan shroud woven from thick, impenetrable darkness. There were no stars in the sky. The atmosphere around Blackthorn Castle grew so oppressive and stifling that the torches lining the corridors cast only feeble, flickering rings of light. According to the kingdom's lore, the new moon was the hour when darkness devoured the light, and the moment the Black Wolf curse, coursing through the veins of every Alpha King, surged with its most primal, uncontrollable fury. Aurelia followed Sir Rowan up the spiral stone stairs leading to the North Tower. Night winds howled through the gaps in the masonry, carrying the bone-chilling cold of the high mountains, yet her palms were slick with sweat. The Council of Elders had invoked a ruthless clause in the Black Moon Covenant, compelling the royal bride to stay beside the king during his cursed night to stabilize his wolf's instincts. They had pushed her up this tower like a lamb into a tiger's den, utterly indifferent to the possibility that the frail frame of Lady Lenora might be crushed should the tyrant lose control. As the heavy iron lock clicked and the oak door creaked open, a blast of icy air mixed with the metallic tang of fresh blood struck Aurelia's senses. She stepped inside, her eyes taking a moment to adjust to the dim, ash-choked glow of the fireplace. In the center of the vast, frigid stone room, Alpha King Hadrian Blackthorn knelt on the floor. The sight before her stole the breath from the former general's lungs. She had heard countless rumors from Dorian's lips that the king of Eldermark was a bloodthirsty monster, a tyrant eager to tear anyone to shreds on nights of the cursed moon. Yet, the man before her was not attacking anyone. His wrists were shackled to the stone wall by chains forged from solid silver. Silver was the bane of their kind, capable of searing a werewolf's flesh. The chains bit deep into his skin, creating blackened, blistered wounds that wept dark blood and emitted thin wisps of acrid smoke. Hadrian was punishing himself. He was imprisoning his own torment, shackling himself in excruciating agony, purely to ensure that the beast within him had no opportunity to harm any innocent soul. The image of the cruel, cold-blooded enemy she had been fed for years shattered instantly against this raw, agonizing reality. Aurelia's footsteps on the stone, though silent, were enough to alert Hadrian's strained, wire-taut senses. He jerked his head up. His usually abyss-black eyes were now clouded with burning crimson, his pupils narrowed into the sharp, vertical slits of a wild beast, locked onto the fragile silhouette standing in the doorway. The black wolf within him let out a deep, guttural growl, frantically trying to tear the silver shackles apart to lunge forward. Yet, when the scent, a blend of cold cedar and wild mountain daisies, wafted from her body into the cramped space, the beast's ferocity abruptly stalled. The warmth radiating from Hadrian's alpha aura enveloped the room, yet strangely, it did not crush her existence. Instead, that energy gently soothed the aching joints left behind by Duchess Malis's toxins, allowing Lenora's weak body to experience, for the first time, a profound, blissful serenity. The mate bond, the most sacred, primal link of their kind, was attempting to mend the wounds of both. "Do not take another step," Hadrian's voice rasped, broken and strained through grit teeth as he fought the agony. He bowed his head, backing into the wall, the silver chains clanking dryly. "The council is insane to send you here. Stay by the door, out of my sight. I swear upon the honor of the throne, I will not let myself touch you when you have not given your consent." His restraint sent a strange, bitter ache through Aurelia's chest. He craved the warmth of her presence. The wild instinct tearing through his veins yearned to mark his fated mate, yet he chose to self-flagellate to keep her perfectly safe. He respected this distance because he believed she was merely an innocent debutante forced into a calculating marriage. Suddenly, the shadows in the room thickened. The new moon had reached its zenith. Green veins bulged on Hadrian's neck, and black scales began to spread from his wrists up his arms. The fury of the curse snatched away the last remnants of his reason. He threw his head back and let out a roar that tore at his throat, jerking his arms with such force that the stone walls cracked and debris rained down. Fresh blood seeped from the wounds carved deep by the silver chains, pooling on the floor. The beast was about to fully awaken. Every survival instinct in Lenora's body screamed at Aurelia to turn and run. But the soul of a general who had stood firm against thousands of soldiers would not allow it. She did not retreat. She gathered her silk skirts and took decisive, measured steps toward the man writhing in his chains. When the distance between them narrowed to a single stride, the wolf in Hadrian snarled, his bloodshot eyes fixed on her throat, ready to snap at anyone who dared come closer. At that moment, Aurelia showed no fear, nor did she use the soft, honeyed words of a bride. She stood straight, wielding that silent, sharp authority of one who had held the power of life and death on the battlefield and commanded, "Look at me. Breathe with me now." The voice was not loud, but it carried an absolute weight that brooked no resistance. It pierced the fog of his madness, striking the central nervous system of the beast. The wolf froze. Hadrian's bloodshot eyes widened, stunned, as they sank into the ash-colored gaze as still as a winter lake. Aurelia took a deep, steadying breath, her chest rising slowly, then exhaling with deliberate calm. She repeated the rhythm, maintaining unbroken eye contact. Drawn into that command, which carried a majestic sense of protection, Hadrian's heaving chest involuntarily began to slow. He began to breathe in sync with her. One breath, two breaths. The black scales on his arms receded, revealing scarred, pale flesh beneath. The red glow in his eyes faded, yielding to the deep, dark obsidian of reason. As the curse's outburst subsided, Hadrian collapsed onto the cold floor, panting with exhaustion. The North Tower fell silent, save for the rhythm of their heavy breathing intermingling. Hadrian leaned his head against the stone wall, his gaze complex and fixed upon the small figure before him. "You," he whispered, his voice trembling with deep, profound questioning. "Where did you learn to command an alpha?" The debutantes of the Ashbourne line never possessed the authority of a general who has led men on the field of war. Aurelia pressed her lips together, avoiding his scorching gaze. She stepped back, maintaining a safe distance. "You should rest, my king. Curiosity will not help your wounds heal." Hadrian closed his eyes, his exhaustion finally overpowering his extraordinary endurance. He drifted into a fitful sleep, his brow still furrowed as if battling relentless nightmares. When the king's breathing had steadied, Aurelia began to calmly observe the room. In a corner near the fireplace stood an intricately carved oak chest, and atop it, a formal black velvet pedestal. Curiosity drove her closer. As the dim light fell upon the object placed there, her pupils constricted violently. It was a scrap of worn, gray fabric, the rough material characteristic of a frontier military uniform, still stained with the dark, dried remnants of blood. Aurelia's heart hammered against her ribs. It was a piece of her cloak. It was the scrap she had torn off to bandage a child during the bloody blizzard at St. Orwin Cathedral years ago. Memories flooded back like a torrent. That day, when she had leveled her blade at the Alpha King's throat, he had not resisted. He had only looked at her, a silent gaze amidst the storm, and let her lead the refugees to safety. Why would the tyrant of Eldermark keep a relic of his enemy with such reverence? He had preserved this blood-stained rag in his most private sanctuary for all these years, just as a lover might cherish the keepsake of his beloved. She was rooted to the spot, her mind reeling as the pieces of the truth began to overturn every prejudice she had ever held about this man. Regaining her composure, she noticed a narrow passage behind the stone wall leading to an adjacent room, the king's private study. She crept inside, feeling her way through the dark with a small candle borrowed from the fireplace. On a desk cluttered with parchment scrolls, a black leather-bound book with faint, ancient lettering caught her eye. It was open to a yellowed page documenting lost forbidden arts. Aurelia brought the candle closer, her eyes scanning the slanted script. The title of the page instantly froze the blood in her veins. Manipulation Magic. Vowbind. The lines that followed described in grueling detail how the spell functioned, striking her mind like serrated blades. It did not rob one of their intellect, but warped their perception. It turned doubt into bone-splitting migraines, transformed natural resistance into overwhelming guilt, and molded blind loyalty into a facade of intense, manufactured love. The book slipped from Aurelia's trembling hands and fell onto the desk without a sound. The air in the room seemed to be sucked dry. Her past with Dorian Marwick flashed before her, the migraines whenever she sought to defy him, the cloying potions he fed her, and the blind love that had made her willingly walk into the sacrificial circle. All those brutal, ridiculous truths now lay bare under the flickering candlelight, once again tearing at the soul of the proud female general. Chapter 6. The Poison Love. The marble corridors of Blackthorn Castle were plunged into silent darkness as Aurelia, carrying a small candle, carefully navigated past the changing guards to reach the abandoned greenhouse in the West Wing. From the fragments of information pieced together in the Forbidden Library, she knew she had to find Isolde, a hermit witch whom the court deemed an eccentric and had long since pushed to the fringes of power. The scent of dried sage and bitter cloves guided her through a rotted oak door. Inside the cramped room, cluttered with glass vials filled with roots and herbs, Isolde sat quietly before a hearth flickering with blue flames, as if she had been awaiting this uninvited guest for a very long time. Aurelia did not beat around the bush. She placed the black leather book scavenged from Hadrian's chambers onto the rough-hewn table, flipping to the yellowed page documenting the ancient ritual. She needed confirmation from the one person who truly understood the dark arts of the realm. Isolde squinted through clouded eyes at the ancient script, the deep wrinkles on her forehead bunching into grooves of profound sorrow. The witch traced the frayed edges of the parchment with gnarled fingers, her raspy voice emerging slowly. Vowbind. A wretched spell born from the cowardice of those who crave dominion but fear betrayal. It does not render the victim a fool or rob them of their mind. On the contrary, it leaves their intellect razor-sharp, yet ruthlessly warps the lens of their emotions. Have you ever felt headaches like splitting hammers whenever you sought to question a decision? That was your reason warring against the magic. Vowbind turns a warrior's natural resistance into overwhelming guilt and molds blind loyalty into a facade of love so intense, the victim willingly offers their life. Each word from Isolde was a blade sliding into the festering wounds of Aurelia's soul. Memories of her years under Dorian Marwick's command surged back, sharper and more cruel than ever. She recalled the times she wanted to question him regarding campaigns that sacrificed too many lives, the times she sensed his decisions were steeped in personal ambition rather than the frontier's ideals. Whenever doubt flickered, that blinding headache would strike, and Dorian would appear with a tender smile and a cup of honeyed moonbane. She had blamed herself for ever daring to doubt the man who stood by her side. Only now did she grasp the bitter truth. The love she had trusted was not the folly of a blind heart, but the result of intricate manipulation that had stripped her of her free will. It is not only your soul that has suffered the trampling of magic, Isolde sighed, reaching out to grasp Lenora's thin wrist, her thumb pressing lightly against the delicate pulse fluttering beneath the pale skin. This girl, Lady Lenora, had truly stepped through the door of death long before your soul took root here. The heat-suppressant Duchess Melis forces you to consume daily is no medicine. It is a slow-acting poison, leaching away the life force to hollow out the vessel. This body was clinically dead on the night you were sacrificed, creating a perfect void for your wandering soul to cling to. A chill raced down the former general's spine. Dorian had used the spell to control her, but he did not hold all the pieces of the board. It was Melis Ashbourne who had provided the moon vessel body, plotting to slay her own husband's daughter to complete a dark ritual to seize the throne. Aurelia and Lenora, one turned into a weapon, the other into a husk, were both wretched victims under the heel of noble ambition. Carrying a cold, buried fury in her eyes, Aurelia departed the witch's room and made her way toward the memorial wing deep in the castle sub-basement. She sought to look upon her own sword once more, the weapon that had been through life and death, now lying silent in her enemy's collection of trophies. As she pushed open the door into the incense-scented chamber, her gaze locked immediately onto the black velvet pedestal. The silver greatsword, snapped in two, lay still beneath the torchlight, but what made her chest tighten was the inscription meticulously carved on the bronze plaque beneath it. Aurelia Vale, the only enemy who forced the King of Blackthorn to bow his head in reverence. The contempt she had been certain the king held for her was a total lie. Beside the bronze plaque, she discovered a small wooden box left slightly ajar. Inside lay neatly stacked letters. One bore Hadrian's strong, decisive script, sealed but never sent. The contents were a secret proposal, inviting her to the North Gate, should she wish to find a way to escape Dorian's rebellious faction. Beside it was another letter, crumpled and stained with tear marks, the trembling handwriting begging for anonymous rescue. That was the hand of the true Lenora. Both girls had sought a path to live, and both had been swallowed by the darkness before they could touch the light. An invisible force compelled Aurelia to reach out and grip the hilt of the broken sword. Though the weight was far too much for the Ashbourne girl's frail hands, her warrior's instinct caused her to pivot her wrist, setting the tip of the blade into a familiar defensive stance. Her heels shifted back, her body forming a perfect defensive diagonal, prepared to meet any attack from the shadows. At that very moment, a heavy footfall sounded behind her. Alpha King Hadrian Blackthorn stood silently at the threshold, the darkness of his wool cloak blending into the stillness of the vault. He radiated no oppressive aura, yet his mere presence seemed to solidify the air. His gaze swept over the stance, the rock-solid center of gravity of the girl standing before the altar, and every effort he had made to delude himself these past days collapsed entirely. No debutante could hold a shattered greatsword in that prideful, life-or-death defensive posture. There was only one soul in this world who had ever stood before him like that, amidst the blinding blizzard of the St. Orwin Cathedral. Hadrian took a step forward, his chest heaving with violent breaths that carried both despair and a hope so fragile it felt cruel. He stared into the familiar ash-colored eyes governing a stranger's face, his voice emerging raspy, trembling, and heavy with the weight of 1,000 years. "Aurelia?" The call fell into the silent space, tearing away every mask both were striving to maintain. Aurelia did not answer immediately. She stood motionless, her fingers clenching the sword hilt until her knuckles turned white. She looked straight into the dark eyes of the man who had been her sworn enemy, the only one who had safeguarded her honor when those she called allies had ruthlessly discarded it. They stood facing each other in the cold memorial room, trapped between the fragile boundary of two lifetimes, between the brutal prejudices of the past and an undeniable truth beginning to sprout. But this quiet reunion was cruelly interrupted when she returned to her chambers the following morning. A letter sealed with blood-red wax sat conspicuously on Lady Lenora's vanity, seemingly slipped in through the window slit by someone in the dark. The familiar, pungent scent wafting from the paper made Aurelia's stomach churn. She broke the seal and pulled out a piece of parchment bearing neat, razor-sharp threats from Dorian Marwick. "I hold the proof that the true Lady Lenora breathed her last under the influence of poison. If you do not meet me at the East Forbidden Forest by midnight, I will publish this truth to the entire council. They will not hesitate to tie you to the stake and burn that fragile body alive for the gravest of crimes, an interloping soul daring to usurp the body of nobility." Chapter 7. Confessions under the Sanctuary. The parchment bearing Dorian Marwick's threat was crumpled into a ball in Aurelia's grip. The flickering candlelight cast her small silhouette against the cold stone wall, illuminating ash-colored eyes burning with the fire of resolve. In the past, whenever faced with commands cloaked in the betrayer's feigned concern, she had always chosen submission, manipulated by the cruel vowbind. But tonight, that spell lay shattered alongside her death in the Black Oak Forest. She was no longer a puppet jerked by the strings of manufactured love, nor was she the frail Lady Lenora waiting for others to decide her fate. If Dorian wished to use this secret as a weapon to drag her back into the shadows, she would step into the light. She chose to lay her own life-or-death cards on the table, rather than allow her enemy to dictate the hour of judgment. Blackthorn Castle was shrouded in the thick mist of the transition between the new moon and the blood moon, a celestial anomaly signaling that the ancient curse was nearing its breaking point. Aurelia donned a deep velvet cloak, concealing her face beneath a discreet hood, and slipped through the quiet corridors toward the ancient sanctuary deep within the palace grounds. She knew Alpha King Hadrian Blackthorn often spent these volatile nights here, not to pray to the gods, but to borrow the sanctity of the space to suppress the beast screaming within his veins. The giant oak doors of the sanctuary opened a mere crack, the pale light from the stained glass windows bleeding onto the marble floor like fresh carnage. The air within was thick with the scent of smoldering frankincense and candle wax. At the altar in the center of the hall, beneath the sorrowful eyes of the moon goddess, Hadrian's towering silhouette appeared still and solitary. He wore no armor, only a black silk shirt drenched in sweat, his hands braced against the cold stone as he poured every ounce of his strength into resisting the gnawing rod of the curse. Aurelia's footsteps were featherlight, yet in the profound silence, they were enough to alert Hadrian's taut senses. He did not turn, merely tilting his head, his voice raspy and exhausted. "I gave orders that none were to disturb me tonight. Even for the royal bride, Lady Lenora. That does not grant you the privilege of entering the sanctuary while I struggle to keep myself from tearing anyone to shreds." Aurelia stopped just paces away. She pulled back her hood, revealing a face pale yet eyes as sharp and steadfast as a spear point ready to pierce any defense. She drew a deep breath, gathering the courage to lay bare the most brutal truth. "Because I am not Lady Lenora Ashbourne." The quiet statement landed with the weight of a mountain, causing Hadrian's broad shoulders to freeze. The air seemed to be sucked from the room. He turned slowly, his abyss-black eyes locking onto her small face, waiting for an explanation for this madness. Refusing to let fear take hold, Aurelia began to recount it all. She spoke of the bloody night in the Black Oak Forest, the cruel sacrificial rite Dorian Marwick had woven to steal her soul. She detailed every inch of the vowbind magic that had warped her loyalty into blind love, the lethal cup of moonbane, and the moment she opened her eyes in a stranger's skin. She did not hesitate to expose the crimes of Duchess Melis, who had used a slow-acting poison to hollow out her own stepdaughter, clearing a path for a coup through the Black Moon Covenant. She stood there, stripping away every wound of her 2 lifetimes, placing herself in the most vulnerable position possible, ready for the tyrant's wrath when he realized the woman before him was the very general of the rebel forces. Yet, contrary to her expectations, Hadrian did not explode in fury, nor did he call his guards to drag her to the dungeon. He simply stood motionless. His silence dragged on, heavy and stifling enough to sink Aurelia's heart into the abyss. She bit her lower lip, her fingers tightening around her cloak. Does he despise me? Is he revolted to know his bride is an interloping soul, an existence so wrong that the council's laws would demand she be burned at the stake? Just as the weight began to erode her final shreds of patience, Hadrian stepped forward. The distance between them vanished in a heartbeat. The alpha aura radiating from him carried no threat, but a sorrow so deep it was agonizing. He bowed his head, his gaze sweeping over the delicate features of Lenora's face, yet piercing straight to the burning soul within. "I know," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, heavy with suppressed emotion. Aurelia stunned, her pupils contracting in disbelief. How long have you known?" "From the way you read the Black Moon Covenant, like a general studying a battle map," Hadrian replied slowly, his eyes never leaving her ash-colored gaze. "From the way you turned the royal dance into tactical retreats to guard your blind spots. From the way you held the broken greatsword in the memorial room. The soul of the silver she-wolf is too vibrant and proud to be contained by any shell. When the mate bond within me screamed in recognition, I lied to myself, calling it a reaction to Lenora's body. But a wolf's instincts never deceive the soul. It was not the Ashbourne bride that awakened my instincts, it was you, Aurelia Vale." Hadrian's words struck her mind like lightning, shattering her rigid preconceptions. But the shock did not end there. The proud king of Eldermark reached out, his battle-scarred fingers hovering in midair just an inch from her cheek, cautious, as if afraid a single touch would shatter the mirage. "Do you remember the blizzard at St. Orwin Cathedral?" Hadrian's voice trembled with haunted nostalgia. "You stood there in blood-stained armor, shielding the defenseless refugees. When your sword was leveled at my throat, you had the chance to slay the Alpha King, to end the bloody war. But you chose to lower your blade, to protect an orphan instead of taking your enemy's life. In that moment, amidst the ruins of the sanctuary, I realized my greatest enemy was the only one possessing the pure heart I had always craved." He closed his eyes, shielding the crimson flare of his own turmoil. "I have loved you since that day, Aurelia, but I dared not admit it. I was bound by the throne, by the Black Wolf curse, and by the cruel reality that you chose to stand under Dorian Marwick's banner. When I heard you had fallen at the border, half my soul died with you. And when you returned in Lenora's form, I was terrified. I feared that if I called your name, I would turn this innocent girl into the shadow of the departed. I feared my love would become a new shackle, robbing you of your life once more." Aurelia's chest heaved. Every confession was a wave crashing against the defensive walls she had labored to build. Love? The enemy she had vowed to destroy was the one man who had harbored a silent, respectful love, willing to bury his own emotions to protect her. The truth was monumental, sincere, but the wounds of that wretched vow-bind still bled in her mind. She had believed in Dorian's love, only to find it was base manipulation. How could she, in a single night, distinguish between true affection and the forced compulsion of the mate bond? As if reading the fear in her eyes, Hadrian lowered his hand and stepped back, granting her safe space. He understood that a soul fresh from such cruel betrayal could not immediately open itself to new feelings, no matter how fierce they might be. Within the sanctuary, under the sinister red light of the rising blood moon, the Alpha King of Eldermark did something no king had ever done before an Omega, or a former prisoner of war. He gathered his wool cloak and slowly knelt on one knee upon the cold stone. It was not a proposal, nor a demand for reciprocation. He looked up at her, silent, tolerant, and possessed of an unwavering strength. "I loved you in silence, like a coward hiding behind the mask of a tyrant." His vow echoed, each word distinct. "This time, I will not use that love to bind you. I do not demand you reciprocate the mate bond, nor will I force you to become the queen of this kingdom.
Il propose en alliance.
Together, we will expose Dorian Marwick and Eldermark Ashbourne and quench the bloody ritual they plot. When it is over, when you are truly free, You shall decide who you are and where your heart belongs. I swear to use this life to defend that choice." Aurelia stood frozen, watching the man kneeling before her. His vow bore no manipulative magic, no flowery lies. It offered absolute respect for her free will, the most precious thing she had ever been denied. In that moment, a fragile yet brilliant spark of hope began to take root in the barren soil of the general's soul. She reached out, ready to help him stand, to formalize this pact of blood and honor. But at that instant, a jarring sound tore through the night. The massive bronze bell from the high tower struck the silent air, each heavy note vibrating through the ancient stone arches. It was not a bell marking a transition, but a frantic emergency signal from the council. The sanctuary doors were shoved open violently. Sir Rowan rushed in, his armor clattering with each ragged breath, his face hardened by extreme tension. "My king." Rowan knelt, his anxious eyes flicking toward Aurelia before he reported. "The Council of Elders has unilaterally convened an emergency tribunal in the dead of night. They have surrounded the Great Hall. The envoy from the frontier, Lord Dorian Marwick, stands before the entire nobility and clergy, publicly accusing your bride of being an interloping soul usurping the body of Lady Lenora." A chill filled the sanctuary. The blood moon outside began to cast a crimson glow over the stained glass windows, the herald of the most brutal storm yet to come. Hadrian's face set like stone, his dark eyes brimming with cold, bone-chilling bloodlust. He stood up slowly and looked at Aurelia. This time, there was no silent protection. The true battle to reclaim their freedom and honor had officially begun. Chapter 8. The Betrayer Who Knew How to Love. The air inside the ancient sanctuary grew thick, so suffocatingly tense that the candles on the altar seemed to tremble and wither. The Council of Elders, high-ranking nobles, and the most powerful clerics of Eldermark had gathered in full, forming a cold circle of judgment. The dim light filtering through the stained-glass windows was not enough to dispel the darkness encroaching upon the minds of all present. Standing at the center of that circle, Lord Dorian Marwick wore his formal envoy's cloak, yet his face was contorted by a feverish, obsessive madness. He had just thrown a spark into a powder keg, publicly declaring before the entire court that the royal bride, Lady Lenora Ashbourne, was in truth a hollow vessel usurped by the soul of the silver she-wolf, Aurelia Vale. The hushed whispers swiftly erupted into a storm of outrage and sheer panic. The crowd of nobles recoiled, the gazes they cast upon Aurelia shifting from the scorn reserved for a weak tribute to the primal terror inspired by dark sorcery. Several elders slammed their staffs against the marble, clamoring to have this devilish woman bound to a stake and burned, to cleanse the noble bloodline and purify the palace from the defilement of a foreign soul. They called her a demon, a seed of destruction, a rebel in angel's clothing. Standing beside her, Alpha King Hadrian Blackthorn gritted his teeth, the bloodlust radiating from his body so intense it seemed to chill the ambient air by several degrees. He reached out with a powerful arm, intending to pull her behind him, to use the shadows and the authority of the throne to shield her from the storm of judgment. Yet, Aurelia shook her head, placing her small hand upon his arm in a gentle but resolute rejection. She had not returned from death to continue hiding or cowering behind another. She stepped forward, her back straight and her chin held high, as proud as the general who had once commanded thousands on the frozen frontier. Her ash-colored eyes swept across the screaming crowd before settling on the face of the one she had once trusted most. Dorian looked at her, his eyes flashing with a flicker of triumph mixed with desperation. He had believed that when she was stripped of every refuge, when the entire kingdom turned to bay for her blood, she would have no choice but to beg for his salvation. He had sought to sever every path, leaving her no option but to fly back into the cage he had meticulously prepared. "You want the truth?" Aurelia's voice rang out, clear, steady, and possessing a piercing strength that cut through the cacophony of the hall. "Very well. I am indeed Aurelia Vale, the one you label a rebel. But before you judge my soul, ask yourselves, what truly killed the real Lady Lenora Ashbourne, leaving behind an empty husk for me to inhabit?" The sanctuary plunged into a deathly silence. Her eyes, sharp as razors, skewered the dark corner where Duchess Maylie stood with arms crossed, a cold, mocking half-smile on her lips. Lady Lenora did not die of sickness or frailty. She died because she was poisoned by her own stepmother with a tonic dubbed heat suppressant, leeching away her vitality day by day to render her a perfect vessel for a dark ritual. Aurelia's accusation echoed clearly, flung into the faces of those who prided themselves on their pure, noble blood. I am a soul adrift, but it was the cruelty of your noble class that carved out the void for my existence. The crowd stirred once more. Suspicious eyes began to shift toward the powerful Duchess of the Ashbourne line. Not far away, Lady Vivian's face paled, her hands hidden in her red silk skirts trembling. She, more than anyone, had witnessed her mother concoct those bitter draughts. Now a horrifying truth took form in her mind. A mother capable of sacrificing a stepdaughter, without a flicker of remorse, would surely sacrifice her own flesh and blood to the fires of ambition if the situation demanded it. Realizing the attention was spiraling out of control, Dorian lost his composed facade. He shoved aside those in his path and hurried toward Aurelia, his eyes bloodshot with the frenzy of one tormented to madness by love and guilt. "Aurelia, please stop," he pleaded, his voice breaking with a sincerity that was agonizing to witness. "I know I was wrong to use the vow bind on you, but do you know? When the blood ritual started, as your life ebbed away in the black oak forest, that magic recoiled upon me. Every ounce of pain you felt, I endured. Your suffocation, your despair, it struck my mind like 1,000 blades in my chest. I lost you only to realize I cannot live without you. I love you, Aurelia. This punishment is enough. Return to me, and I will give my life to protect you from this council, from this rotting throne." The betrayer's crazed confession rang out in the sacred space, exposing a soul rotted by blind possessiveness. He used the agony of the magical backlash as proof of love, delusional enough to believe that belated regret could erase his heinous crimes. He wanted her to believe he was also a victim of the tragedy he himself had woven. Yet Aurelia did not waver. Her lips curled into a faint, mocking smile tinged with profound sorrow. She looked straight into his pleading eyes, her voice cold enough to freeze the blood in his veins. "You call this love, Dorian? A love that required poison to soothe doubt and magic to shackle free will." Every word was a hammer blow to his delusions. "You say you felt my pain after the vowbind recoiled? You are wrong. What you felt were merely the echoes of death. My true pain was the years I spent imprisoned by your vile manipulation. Dorian Marwick did not love me when I had the choice. He only loved me after he had murdered that choice himself." Dorian retreated half a step, his face ashen as a hollow corpse. He realized the chasm between them was not one of life and death, nor of flesh and blood, but a permanent, irreparable severance. At that moment, a cold, sharp laugh erupted from the shadows, shattering the stifling silence. Duchess Maylie stepped into the light, completely shedding her facade of noble grace. She reached up and tore away the silk concealing an amethyst necklace, which pulsed with a brilliant red light, harmonizing with the blood moon hanging in the sky. A touching play of love and betrayal, but our time is at an end, Maylis declared coldly, her gaze sweeping over Dorian with utter disdain. "Lord Marwick, you thought you were using me to open the seal and usurp the throne? You are naive. The Ashbourne family was never a pawn of the frontier. From the very beginning, it was our bloodline that forged the Black Wolf curse." The entire sanctuary gasped, the air sinking into a nameless horror. Maylis continued in a voice of regal authority, laying bare the darkest secret in Eldermark's history. "Generations ago, to force the Blackthorn royal line to depend upon our power, the witches of Ashbourne sowed a curse into their very veins. The Black Moon Covenant is no salvation. It is a collar to imprison the beast. The moon vessel was not born to break the curse, but to absorb it, thereby gaining absolute control over the Alpha King's mind. And now, with the blood moon at its zenith, the final ritual shall be complete." She began to chant in an ancient, forgotten tongue. Instantly, the scroll of the Black Moon Covenant upon the altar burst into flames, the ancient runes floating in midair before streaking toward Lenora's frail body. The crescent moon birthmark on Aurelia's collarbone pulsed with agonizing heat, radiating a searing energy that felt as if it were burning her very marrow. Melis intended to use this spell to crush both Aurelia's soul and Lenora's lingering will, turning this frame into a mindless puppet to hold the reins of the tyrant. Recognizing the vile plot to utterly destroy the woman he loved, Dorian roared in fury. He drew his sword and lunged toward Melis, channeling his own magic in a desperate bid to shatter the closing ritual circle. He wanted to atone, to use his own life to preserve her soul, knowing well that it could never bring her back to him. Simultaneously, the massive doors of the sanctuary slammed shut by an unseen force, sealing everyone inside a cramped space thick with incense and the metallic tang of blood. Through the stained glass windows, the light of the blood moon pierced the hall, casting a crimson glow upon the towering figure of the Alpha King. The curse, agitated by the Ashbourne matrix, erupted with terrifying speed. Pitch-black scales spread across Hadrian's body, his sharp claws shredding his expensive silk shirt, and his eyes shifted into the wild, incandescent red of savage murder. The Black Wolf had been forced awake, carrying a rage suppressed for centuries, ready to dye the sacred sanctuary with the blood of those who dared deceive the throne. The final judgment had begun. Chapter 9. The King's Lawless Vow. The air within the ancient sanctuary thickened under the crimson light of the blood moon, which bled through the massive arched stained-glass windows. Melis Ashbourne stood looming amidst the altar like a priestess of darkness, the amethyst necklace upon her chest pulsed with an eerie aura, resonating violently with the curse now spiraling out of control. At the center of the magical matrix, Alpha King Hadrian Blackthorn collapsed upon the cold marble floor. His towering frame convulsed repeatedly as pitch-black scales of primal instinct spread from his wrists to his very cheekbones. The obsidian eyes that once held steadfast determination and a silent, buried love were now devoured by the incandescent red of wild, savage fury. The Black Wolf, imprisoned for centuries within the veins of the Blackthorn bloodline, shrieked to be set free, ready to tear asunder any living soul that dared obstruct its path. The Council of Elders retreated in sheer terror, their wizened faces ashen with panic. The eldest count leveled his staff at Aurelia, his trembling voice shrieking for the royal guard to slay the royal bride instantly. They believed that only by destroying the conduit of the Black Moon Covenant could this wretched bond be severed, sparing the kingdom from the tyrant's wrath. Yet, if Aurelia were to die now, the curse would forever consume Hadrian's mind, turning him into the mindless, slaughtering monster of the nobility's darkest tales. Do you truly believe that death solves everything? Duchess Melis unleashed a sharp, cold peal of laughter that echoed through the stone vaults, brimming with disdain. Moon vessels are born with one singular purpose: to submit to the Alpha King. They exist to offer their bodies, to absorb the filthy curse of the throne, and to perish with the honor bestowed upon them by the Ashbourne house. Lady Lenora has been prepared by my hand for years. Regardless of what alien soul currently inhabits that shell, the fate of the vessel never changes. It must submit, it must kneel, and it must shoulder this darkness until it shatters. The word submit, spat from Melis's lips, was like a lightning bolt cleaving through the fog in Aurelia's mind. She recalled the Black Moon Covenant, with its harsh clauses repeating the demand for unconditional submission. She remembered Dorian's vow-bind magic that had forced her into absolute loyalty. The key to all these curses and spells lay not in blood or life, but in the theft of free will. The moon vessels before her had met tragic ends because they believed they had no choice. They walked into the ritual with fear and resignation. The Black Wolf curse was nurtured by that very blind submission. Not one of them had ever dared to stand and break the law with their own hands. Without hesitation, Aurelia gathered her skirts, sidestepping the bewildered guards, and strode directly into the crimson circle of the curse. Her appearance caused the dark heat to lash out at her white silk gown, but the former general's stride remained unshakable. She did not enter to be sacrificed like a blind lamb, but to rewrite the oath that had imprisoned 2 lifetimes. As her warmth and the scent of wild mountain daisies permeated the air, the black wolf within Hadrian reacted violently. He let out a roar that tore at his throat, extending razor-sharp claws to lunge and rend the intruder to pieces. But the very moment the beast's bloodshot pupils met her ash-colored gaze, a horrific internal struggle erupted within the king's mind. Despite the bloodlust scorching his veins, Hadrian gritted his teeth until blood flowed, using his remaining strength to pull back. His 10 fingers clawed deep into the solid stone, gouging jagged grooves as he fought to restrain himself, to ensure he would never harm the woman he loved. This struggle against primal instinct was the most eloquent proof to shatter the council's lies. He was no blood-drunk tyrant. He was a warrior fighting his final breath to protect his kingdom and his fated mate. From the edge of the magical circle, Sir Rowan stepped forward, driving his guard's sword deep into the floor. The knight's voice rang out, steely and resonant, affirming the integrity of the throne. The king has never been a monster. At St. Orwyn Cathedral years ago, he ordered the life of the silver she-wolf, Aurelia Vale, to be spared, even commanding his army to retreat to protect the lives of innocents. He has always used his reason to suppress the curse, unlike those who bear the name of noble, yet heartlessly poison their own flesh and blood. Following the knight, Lady Vivian emerged from the trembling crowd of nobles. Her face, usually etched with haughty pride, was now pallid with fear, yet her eyes glinted with a defiance never seen before. My mother personally concocted the slow-acting poison to kill my sister Lenora, preserving an empty shell for this ritual. She never cared for the honor of our house. She only sought to turn all Ashbourne women into sacrifices for her own thirst for power. Realizing her web of manipulation was unraveling and that Aurelia was attempting to forge a new covenant to shatter the curse, Melis roared in fury. She raised her quartz necklace, pouring all her dark power into crushing Aurelia's soul right where she stood. An invisible pressure, heavy as a mountain, descended upon the girl's slight shoulders, forcing Lenora's frame to drop to its knees on the cold floor. The crescent moon birthmark on her collarbone pulsed like white-hot iron, radiating a blinding, agonizing light. In that mortal moment, a surge of silver magic tore through the space, striking Melis's wicked aura. Dorian Marwick lunged forward, his envoy's cloak in tatters, his bloodshot eyes burning with a tragic, heroic resolve. He poured the entirety of his life force into erecting a magical barrier between the treacherous Duchess and the ritual circle, his bare hands shielding the destructive force about to descend. He knew he could never win back Aurelia's heart. His betrayals had dug a chasm that could never be bridged. But in this moment, he could not bear to let her die again. Dorian turned back, blood trickling from his lips into a mournful smile, and roared for her to complete the oath. Seizing the precious moment Dorian had bought with his life, Aurelia forced herself to stand tall. She felt a fragile, yet indomitable will rising from the depths of this body, the lingering soul of Lenora Ashbourne. The frail girl used her final spark of consciousness to reach out, drawing the silver she-wolf's powerful soul into her core, for she knew only the wolf had the courage to shatter the cursed fate of the moon vessel. The crescent birthmark was not a mark of sacrifice, but a symbol of transformation and rebirth. Aurelia stepped forward, casting aside every tremor of hesitation, and firmly placed her small hand upon the Alpha King's heaving chest. The warmth from her palm traveled through his icy black scales, touching the heart beating in such agonizing rhythm. Her eyes shone like the stars of the north as she swore an oath, each word echoing through the sanctuary like a bell tolling to dispel a millennium of darkness. I am Aurelia Vale, the warrior who is deceived and turned into a weapon. I also carry the body of Lenora Ashbourne, the girl who was trampled and turned into a vessel. Today, under the gaze of the blood moon, we both reject this orchestration. The throne of Eldermark needs no sacrifice, and our souls shall never again submit to another. The moment the words "shall never submit" rang out with absolute self-respect and free will, the crimson circle beneath their feet cracked wide. The ancient magical matrix of the Ashbourne line shattered into a myriad of silver light crystals, hovering in the air. The black scales upon Hadrian's body crumbled, restoring the form of a majestic king, his wild bloodlust washed away by that cleansing light. The Black Wolf curse was broken, not by blood or sacrifice, but by the most sacred of human rights, self-determination. Hadrian gasped for air, hastily circling his arms to catch the small, trembling body before him. He called her name, his voice warm, overflowing with the relief of infinite love. Yet, his embrace suddenly turned cold as he realized Lenora's frame was losing its warmth. Aurelia's ash-colored eyes slowly drifted shut, and the weak heartbeat in her chest ceased entirely in the king's arms. The price for the kingdom's freedom had just been paid with the life of the woman he loved most, leaving a silence so profound it was suffocating within the sanctuary, now littered with the ruins of ancient magic. Chapter 10. No More Shackles. When Aurelia opened her eyes once more, the moon hanging outside the massive arched windows had ceased its blood-red vigil. A gentle, pure silver light bathed the ruined sanctuary, coating all things in a veil of ethereal, peaceful lunar dust. Lady Lenora's body no longer felt heavy, nor did the dull, gnawing aches persist deep within her marrow. Melis's residual toxins and the crushing pressure of the moon vessel curse had been entirely purified alongside the collapse of the magical circle. In a moment of stillness between the boundaries of consciousness, Aurelia felt a phantom warmth brush against her mind. It was the final will of Lenora Ashbourne. The fragile girl left behind a sigh of relief, a wordless gratitude that someone had finally helped her reclaim her destiny, before her soul dissolved gently into eternity to seek the freedom she had never touched in life. A few days after the horrific blood moon, the grand square of Blackthorn Palace was packed beneath the clear winter sky. The council, the nobility, and tens of thousands of citizens gathered to witness the final judgment destined to restore order to the kingdom of Eldermark. Duchess Elise Ashbourne, once perched on the pinnacle of arrogance and ambition, was now stripped of every title and symbol of authority. She knelt upon the cold stone, her eyes still burning with resentment but utterly powerless against the sentence of total asset forfeiture and permanent exile. Her downfall signaled the official erasure of the Ashbourne family from the council, ending centuries of manipulating the throne through blood-stained covenants. Standing not far away, Lady Vivian bowed her head, accepting the royal court's judgment. Thanks to her courage in testifying to unmask her mother's poisoning, her life was spared, though she was banished from the capital, a self-imposed exile to atone for the errors of the past. For the first time in her life, the girl who had always been consumed by envy realized that power was not the only armor for a woman's survival. True strength lay in the honesty and courage to save oneself. When Lord Dorian Marwick stepped onto the judgment platform, the square fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The frontier lord appeared gaunt, his envoy's cloak in tatters from his final attempt to defy Melis's matrix. He offered no justification for his crimes, nor did he plead for leniency. His gaze remained fixed upon Aurelia, carrying a remorse so profound and a love so twisted that he had forever lost the right to voice it. Alpha King Hadrian Blackthorn did not grant him death. Violence was too easy an escape for those who carried such blood debts. Instead, Dorian was stripped of his noble status and exiled to the most austere monastery deep within the northern snow-capped mountains. There, he would spend the rest of his days studying the ancient arts, seeking ways to dissolve the vow-bind spells he had so ruthlessly inflicted upon countless warriors. The sentence was a penance that would endure until his final breath. When the guilty had bowed to their sentences, the Alpha King strode to the highest step of the square, where the sunlight glinted brilliantly off his wolf-fur-trimmed black cloak. His alpha aura radiated power and majesty, yet it no longer held the stifling, savage restlessness of the dark curse. Before tens of thousands of eyes, Hadrian spoke, vindicating the woman standing at his side. He proclaimed to the entire kingdom that Aurelia Vale had never been the bloodthirsty rebel of rumor. She was a proud general, a compassionate warrior manipulated by base sorcery and the cruel machinations of the power-hungry. By the honor of the Blackthorn throne, he restored her rightful luster as the Silver She-Wolf, shattering every lie that had buried her name for so many years. From the chief cleric, Hadrian received the Luna crown, forged of pure silver and set with the finest moonstones. The entire square seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the moment the sovereign king would crown his fated mate, formally closing a chapter of blood and tears. Yet Hadrian did not. He descended a step, stopping directly before Aurelia, and held the crown aloft with both hands. His gaze held a love so deep, silent, and indulgent that her heart skipped a beat. I once loved you as an unreachable enemy, hiding my feelings behind the cold mask of war. The king's voice rang out, each word etched into the air. Today, I love you as a free man, with all the respect and sincerity this life can contain. Therefore, I will never place this crown upon you as an act of compulsion. You must decide whether to take it, for this throne is only whole when it is shared with your will. Aurelia stood motionless, watching the towering man who had granted her total dominion over her own destiny. The scars from the Vaubyne's betrayal seemed soothed by the absolute reverence Hadrian held for her. Yet, she did not reach for the mate bond mark, nor did she hasten to ascend the glorious throne. She chose to remain at Blackthorn Castle as a stalwart ally, a former general who would begin the task of reforming the royal military and establishing new laws to protect Omegas from the tragedy of forced, bloody political marriages. She stood before the council, proudly declaring her new name, Aurelia Lenora Vale, a title that preserved the honor of a warrior and cleared the name of the girl who had passed on. Months later, when the winter snows had melted to reveal the sprouts of spring, Blackthorn Castle welcomed a night of gentle, radiant moonlight. The Black Wolf curse had not vanished entirely from the king's veins, but it was no longer a shackle imprisoning his reason. It had become a primal strength, balanced and controlled by a voluntary union of souls. Aurelia stepped onto the marble balcony, where Hadrian stood quietly, greeting the night breeze that carried the scent of the deep woods. She wore no armor to hide in defensive caution, nor silk gowns that constricted her breath. She was simply herself, a woman who had healed her own bleeding scars. The warmth of the mate bond shone brilliantly between them, not because of a forced curse or an ancient contract, but because of the free choice of two hearts that had weathered 1,000 storms to find one another. She picked up the silver crown resting on a stone table nearby, her long fingers caressing the gems sparkling under the moonlight. Her gaze lifted to the great king of her life, a gentle yet resolute smile blooming on her lips, her voice steady enough for the night itself to record. I will not be your queen because of a marriage contract or a prophecy. I will be it only if this kingdom learns never to turn women into sacrifices ever again.